You may be seated.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to The Well. If this is your first time joining us, or if you're just visiting, we're glad you're here. Much of the service has been designed with someone like you in mind. The people you see with a blue name tag would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. We encourage everyone to explore and download our mobile app. To find the app, visit cometothewell.org/app. There you'll find service guides, sermon notes, a place to submit prayer requests, and much more. Also on our app, or in the seat back in front of you, you will find our Connect card. All we need is your name and email, and we'll be reaching out to let you know how to get further connected with The Well. After service, some of our staff and other leaders will be in the back of the auditorium. They would love to meet you and give you a special gift for joining us. If you have yet to attend Growth Track, or if you're new, that would be your next step. Growth Track is our 2-week class that will help you discover how you can make a difference in the community through our church. Later in the service, our host will let you know when the next opportunity to attend Growth Track will be. Well, we're excited to worship with you this morning, but first, turn to someone around you and say hi.
Well, good morning. Welcome to The Well. How are you guys doing this morning? Good? All right, great. For those of you who have not had a chance to meet yet, my name is John. My wife, Sarah, and I have the privilege of serving as elders here at The Well. And if you're a guest with us this morning, I want to say welcome. We're so glad that you're here. And can we also give it up for all of those that are joining us online this morning? So we are also grateful that you are here, and we do hope to see you here at one of our future services here at our Geneva campus. And so we're grateful that you're here joining us online today. So some great things and exciting things happening here at The Well. On Wednesday night, we had our high watermark service. The team did an amazing job of just leading us in a night of praise and worship. So if you've never experienced a high watermark, we encourage you to check those out. They're usually held every month, and so there'll be more information coming out about the next high watermark, so we want to see you there. Yesterday, I had the opportunity and privilege of taking our team that was going to Ecuador to the airport. So we have a picture of the team here. 13 Wellers went down to Ecuador to work with our ministry partner, Panda Vida. So we took them yesterday. We had to actually take 2 carloads because we had the big 15-passenger van full, as well as another car with luggage. One of the ladies on the trip did bring with her 3 suitcases. She assured me that some of that was being donated to the ministry down there in Ecuador. I really do believe, though, that one of those suitcases just had shoes. So they left yesterday. They're going to be down there all this week. They'll come back Sunday. They're going to be down there doing VBS, Vacation Bible School, with the kids that they minister to. They're going to be going into the city and be doing home visits with families. And then at some point, they're going to head out into the country and actually do some farming. So we're going to put them to work there in Ecuador. So they're going to be in Quito for all of this week. So be in prayer for them as they're down there. That God would just use that trip to really join them together. I mean, these are all smiling faces now because these are 13 people who have not been with each other for all week yet. But when they come back, we've seen really lasting relationships built through short-term missions trip, and just people come back really on fire for their faith. And so just be in prayer for them. If you are interested in taking a short-term mission trip, the good news is that we do have another one planned. So while we're in Ecuador this week, in April, we have another team that's getting ready to go down to Guatemala. So if you have interest in learning more about that trip, don't worry. If you go to the website, it's not like you signed up to go on the trip. But if you want to get more information, cometothewell.org/Guatemala, and it'll have the dates on there. You can show interest in the trip. When Pastor Shannon gets back from Ecuador, she would love to be able to tell you more about that trip and what we'll be doing down with the James Project of Latin America. The other thing that we want to make you aware of is coming up next week on Tuesday, we've got Halloween. So we've got our Halloween block parties. This is a great way for us to go into our community, rub shoulders with our neighbors, get to know the people in our neighborhood, and just really be able to share the love of Christ in a very practical way by handing out candy to kids. But it's always funny whenever we host a block party, just the conversations that are had during that block party. It's a great way to really get to know our community. So there's 6 different locations. We have one in St. Charles, 2 in Geneva, 2 in Batavia, and 1 in Aurora. So if you're interested in learning where exactly those block parties are going to be, make sure you go to cometothewell.org/Halloween. All of those block parties are listed. My family will be hosting one. We're in the Mill Creek neighborhood, and so my daughter gets excited every time the bounce house shows up and devastated every time the bounce house leaves. But the block parties are always a lot of fun. Well, we're wrapping up our series this morning called Teach Us to Give, in which we've been using our theme verse of John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. How can we learn to be generous? What does Scripture have to teach us about generosity? And the reason that we have this series right here, right now, is because it's leading up to our legacy gift that we take every year in December, in which we as a body collectively come together and see our generosity go into all of the different reaches of the world. So we're looking for opportunities to bless ministry partners, and so none of that gift stays here. It all goes out into other ministry partners. So that's going to be on December 10th, so you're going to want to make sure you mark your calendars for that. We did have a Weller who provided a $25,000 match, so for any gift that comes in up to the first $25,000, they are matching. So we're really excited about what God's going to be doing through the legacy gift and how we can provide for a ministry partner. So just a reminder where the legacy gift goes. The first thing that we do is we always want to make sure to take care of our ministry partners who are in the field day in and day out. We want to make sure that we take care of Christmas for their kids. Just love on them because of what they're experiencing. A lot of these kids are outside of their own culture, in another culture with their parents. And so we just want to bless them and thank them for what they've done, the sacrifices that they've made in order for their family to be on the mission field. But then we also look to bless several different ministries that we partner with who work specifically with children. And so we've got Love 146. They have 2 homes that we help support Christmas for those kids. These are kids that have been rescued from human trafficking. And so there's the Round Home and the White Home that we help support. We also work with Children's Cup that is primarily focused, the efforts that we support are primarily focused in Africa. And Pastor Jerry and Carrie had the opportunity to go and work with Children's Cup in September, so we're really excited to see what God is doing there. And then we also have the Shadow of His Wings, the James Project of Latin America, the group home that's there in Monjas, Guatemala, that we support and help provide Christmas for those kids as well. And I've had the distinct privilege of going down and being able to interact with these kids and see kind of firsthand how that gift really does have an impact on them. When they find out that the well is there that helps provide Christmas, these kids come from all over the place to say thank you and really enjoy what it is that we do for them. And I wanted to just share a picture with you just to kind of put a face with where this legacy gift goes. So this is a picture of Helen. Helen is a girl that I met when I first went down to Guatemala back in 2015. Me and 2 other Wellers went down there in order to scout out the Guatemala project to see, is this somewhere that we want to take teams? And we fell so in love with them that not only are we sending teams down there, but we also support them on a regular basis. And so Helen was one of the girls that I first met down there in 2015. I was drawn to her because she is much like my children. You could hear her anywhere you were on the grounds of the project because she's super loud. She laughs loud. She screams loud. She just enjoys life loud. So it attracted me much like my own children. And so for years, I would go down and I would see her. Every year, I would see her. My family, we ended up supporting her down there. And this was a picture that was taken because when you support the kids at the James Project of Latin America, if you go down on a short-term missions trip, they like to give you some one-on-one time with the kids that you support. So she and I were playing games, and I just love this picture of her smile and kind of just the where she was in this point in her life. Yes, she was in this home that was taking care of her, but she was happy and she was healthy. And about a year after this picture was taken, I was notified that Helen was moved from Shadow of His Wings, the James Project, and moved to another home in Belize. Helen is actually not Guatemalan. She's from Belize. Somehow she ended up in Guatemala, and it had been petitioned by the Belize government to move her back into Belize. And the reason why that was happening is her father was with the courts trying to get her reunited with him. And so she was moved in June of 2018 from Guatemala back to Belize. And while we would think maybe that's a great thing to celebrate, that she's going to get reunited with her family, what you have to know about Helen's father is that he is a pimp and that he loans out women. And his only reason for now expressing interest in Helen was that she was becoming of age for him to be able to do the same thing to her. And so when I look at this picture, I know that when we've supported her through the Christmas, through the legacy gift, those are those things that hopefully she will look back on and remember and hold to, because I have no idea where Helen is today or what Helen is experiencing. So I just wanted you to be able to put a face with what happens with the legacy gift. There are children just like Helen. There are hundreds of them down in Guatemala. We support so many through the Round Home and the White Home, through Love 146 and through Children's Cup. Really, first of all, let me say thank you to those of you that will help support the legacy gift. It really is going to make an impact in those kids' lives. So as we wrap up this series, I just want to kind of recap what we've been discussing. Again, Teach Us to Give. We've been talking about this idea of generosity. Pastor Jerry kicked us off in the first week talking about us being rightly oriented, and he was talking about generosity as we think about the tithe, our regular giving that we do week in and week out, month in, month out, or year in and year out, and how we need to make sure that we're being consistent in our giving, that we're giving back to God first what he gave to us. And so he gave us 3 quick action steps which were to start wherever you are. We love people into deeper levels of relationship with Jesus Christ here at the Well because we know that each and every one of you are at a different place in your walk with Christ. And so for some of you, you've been tithing for years and that's not ever been an issue for you. But for some of you, that idea of generosity is something brand new. It's something that you're working through or that you're working towards. And Pastor Jerry says, start wherever you are. Just start today. Make it a habit. And then the other thing that he told us to do is eventually get to giving proportionately. We believe here at the Well that a tithe is a tenth. And so we encourage people, get to that point where you can be giving consistently and giving proportionately. Last week, we talked about not only being rightly oriented, but we talked about being rightly prioritized, that when we think about our generosity, it is not for us, but it is for others, and that we need to think about people when it comes to generosity. And he talked about the 2 action steps there were, 1, don't consume everything that we have. So in the Bible, one of the things that it talks about is when they would harvest fields, they would never go right up to the very edge of the field, but rather they would leave a little bit of margin, and that margin specifically was for the poor and for the needy. They had that viewpoint, they had that mindset of, hey, I want to leave something for those who need it. So they didn't consume everything they had, and he said, help everyone you can. When there's opportunities to be generous, look to be able to step out in generosity and support others. So we talked about being rightly oriented. We talked about being rightly prioritized. And this morning we want to talk about being rightly praised. And so we're going to be looking at a specific story in the Bible. So if you have your Bibles and you want to open up to 1 Chronicles 29, we're going to take a look at this. Now, a few years ago, I spoke when Pastor Jerry was out of town, and I spoke on the topic of missions. And one of the things that I did in that message was I wanted to do something unique, and I figured with him being out of town, I could get away with this. So thinking about being on mission and on point, I asked everybody to change seats with someone else. And so it was really cool. We watched as people in the back moved up here into the front, and people in the front moved to the back, and people over here moved over here, and just everybody swapped seats with one another. So that was with missions. Now that we're talking about generosity, I thought maybe you guys will just want to swap wallets with one another. So if you guys want to start that, no takers. Okay. All right. Well, I tried. It didn't work. All right, so here in 1 Chronicles 29, we have King David is nearing the end of his life, and he has this deep desire and passion to build for God the temple. It's something that's been on his heart and on his mind for a long time, and so he's finally at this point where I only have a limited amount of time left. I want to do something great for God. I'm going to finally build this temple. And God comes to him and says, thanks, but you can't. You're known as a king of war, and I can't have a king of war being the one who builds my temple. And he says, but your son can. And so while I know this is a deep passion of yours, I'm going to allow Solomon to be the one to build this temple, but you're not going to be able to do it. But David doesn't stop there. He decides, fine, if I can't do it, then I can at least donate towards it. I can at least create the resources and the supplies that are needed for this to happen. And so this is where we pick up in 1 Chronicles 29. And it says, and David the king said to the assembly, Solomon my son, whom alone God has chosen, is young and inexperienced. And the work is great, for the palace will not be for man, but for the Lord God. So I have provided for the house of my God so far as I was able, the gold for the things of gold, the silver for the things of silver, the bronze for the things of bronze, the iron for the things of iron, and the wood for the things of wood, besides great quantities of onyx and stones for setting, antimony, colored stones, all sorts of precious stones, and marble. Moreover, in addition to all that I have provided for the holy house, I have a treasure of my own, gold and silver. And because of my devotion to the house of my God, I give it to the house of my God. 3,000 talents of gold and of gold of Ophir, and 7,000 talents of refined silver for overlaying the walls of the house. And for all the work to be done by the craftsmen, gold for the things of gold and silver for the things of silver, who then will offer willingly, consecrating himself today to the Lord? Then the leaders of the Father's house made their free will offerings, as they did also the leaders of the tribes, the commanders of the thousands and of hundreds, and officers over the king's work. And they gave for the service of the house of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 derricks of gold and 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. And whoever had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the house of the Lord, and in the care of Jehiel the Gershonite. And then the people rejoiced because they had given willingly, for with a whole heart they had offered freely to the Lord. And David the king also rejoiced greatly. So as we think about this passage here, as we talk through this, the first thing that I want us to understand about David is while he couldn't do, he found reasons to donate. He couldn't be the general contractor of the project, but he could definitely be the one that provides the resources to get this done. And the other thing that David did was he invited people to be a part of this with him. He didn't look to do it just himself. What he gave, just he alone, would have been enough to build an amazing temple. But instead what he did was he opened it up to the people and he encouraged them to participate in generosity with him. I remember years ago, when we took one of the teams down to Guatemala, every year we encourage the people who go on the trip, really consider asking people to help support you. There are people out there that look for ways to be generous, and this is a great way for them to do that. And we had one lady on the trip who was going to push herself. She was going to ask, but she was hesitant at first. And she wrote out her support letters, and then she just kind of sat on them, and she said, maybe I'll just pay for the trip myself. I don't want to bother anybody with this. And I told her, I said, don't get in the way of someone else's generosity. And so she mailed the letters, and she waited. And within a week, we got a check from one of the people that was supporting her on the trip, and it covered pretty much all of her expenses to go. I happened to know who that family was that donated, and I went to them, and I said, hey, thank you for what it was that you did. That really is going to mean a lot to her. And they told me about how at that particular moment, they were in the process of renovating their kitchen. They were spending tens of thousands of dollars renovating this kitchen, and they were starting to kind of feel guilty about what it was that they were doing. And so the husband and wife sat down and they said, we're going to pray that God would give us an opportunity to be a blessing to someone else, even in the midst of all of this construction that we're doing. They sat down, they prayed, went out and checked the mailbox, and there was the letter asking for the support. And so they said that really meant a lot to us, that there was that opportunity for us to participate in generosity with other people. So David is going to make sure that he provides the resources, but he's not going to do it alone. He's going to look for those opportunities to engage the people. So when we talk about the call that David is making to the people, the three things that I want us to see about the call is, number one, that it was great. What he was asking for was not anything small. They've gone back and kind of redone the numbers to figure out exactly what the worth would have been of what David donated during that time. And there's numbers anywhere between $1 to $5 billion is what he donated at this time. And then the people matched his donation and even gave even more. So this was not a small thing. He was asking for something big. He wanted to create something elaborate. He wanted to make this really worth the generosity. The other thing that he did was he noticed that he says very specifically the time frame in which he's wanting to do this. He's not saying in a few years from now, let's build this temple, or eventually, since I can't build it, the next generation can build it, so we can have those donations follow later on. He says, no, today. Who is willing today to follow me in this? And so the call was urgent. There was a time frame in which he was looking to get this done. And then the other thing that I want you to see is not only was the task great, and not only was it urgent, but it really was for the Lord. That David was trying to communicate to the people, this is not for us, this is for the Lord. We're going to make this thing super ornate. We're going to make this temple, when people see it, they're going to be wowed by it because it's not for us. This truly is for the Lord. And he uses a word there where he says, who will consecrate themselves or consecrate himself to the Lord today? That word consecrate, sometimes we get it confused with the word sanctify. Sometimes you'll see people use that interchangeably, but they really are two different words. Sanctification is a process that we go through where we become more like Christ. As we get to know and understand the things of Christ, we become more like him. We take on more of that attitude and those attributes. When it comes to consecration, though, that is the first step in the sanctification. Consecration really is a decision that you're making. It's when you're deciding, I'm going to focus more on the spiritual and less on the physical. I'm not going to let the circumstances dictate what I'm feeling or how I'm living my life. I'm really going to allow God to be the one to do that. I'm setting myself apart for the Lord to do the work in me. And so we're giving priority to the spiritual over the physical. We see that this is not the only time that this word is used. We find this back in Joshua. So generations before this time with David, you have Joshua who is about to lead the Israelites into the promised land. They've now been rescued from Egypt, and now they've been spending all this time in the wilderness, and now it's finally time for them to take hold of the promised land. And they come to the edge of the Jordan, and there they wait for 3 days. But eventually Joshua comes to them on the third day, and he says to the people in Joshua 3:5, he says, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. He's saying, listen, we've planned and we've prepared and we've waited, but now today is the day that we make the decision. Today is the day that we decide to set ourselves apart for the Lord's work. Today is when we make this decision to focus on the spiritual rather than the physical. And the reason he's saying that is, while they're very excited about going into the promised land, Joshua knows that if they don't have the right focus, they're going to get distracted by all of the things that they experience in the promised land. But this is a decision that's a personal decision. It's something that he's telling them, hey, listen, you have to consecrate yourselves. I can't do it for you. You're going to have to make this decision on your own. As we think about that in regards to generosity, Paul says something very similar in 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians 9:7, he says, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. That when you're consecrating yourselves to what God has for you, that's a personal decision that you're making. And when you do that, it's amazing what God will open up for you and how that can have a true impact on your generosity. And we see that within the people here. So let's take a look at how they gave. We notice that in Scripture it says in 1 Chronicles, there's several ways in which they gave. The first way that they gave was they gave wholeheartedly. They gave wholeheartedly. That idea of wholeheartedly means completely and sincerely devoted, determined or enthusiastic, and then this is my favorite part, without any doubt. That when they gave, because they had first consecrated themselves, they had first made the decision, I'm going to focus on the spiritual and not on the physical. Now I can give from a deep place within my heart, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know that God is going to do something amazing with the gifts that I bring him. In Exodus, we find this same idea. So while David here is wanting to build the temple, in Exodus, we find that God comes to Moses and he says, I want for you to build me a tabernacle. It's the same idea. The tabernacle was something that moved around with the Israelites as they moved from place to place. That was the place that the Ark of the Covenant would rest. That signified where God dwelled. As David looked to build the temple, this was going to become that permanent structure that served the same purpose. But here in Exodus 25, God comes to Moses and he says, I want you to build for me a tabernacle. So he says, speak to the people of Israel that they take for me a contribution. But he says, from every man whose heart moves him, you shall receive the contribution for me. So listen, I'm not interested in the contribution that comes just because you feel like you have to give. I'm really interested in the contribution that comes because the heart of the person giving it was moved. They gave wholeheartedly to this project, to this thing that I'm trying to accomplish. So for them, after they've consecrated themselves, they come with the right heart and they give wholeheartedly. But then it also says that they gave willingly. And there is a distinction between giving something wholeheartedly and giving something willingly. There's a difference between want and the will. For instance, I could want to lose a lot of weight, but I may not be willing to give up triple cheeseburgers at McDonald's to do so. There's a difference between those things. Want speaks more to my heart. Willing speaks more to my position and how I place myself. I had this conversation with my wife this week in which we have 4 kids. We have 3 boys. Our youngest is Sam. We have a picture of Sam here. So Sam is a kid that does everything extreme. He plays hard. He laughs hard. When he gets mad, he gets angry. When he sleeps hard. And my wife came to me the other morning and she says, hey, do you want to go wake up Sam for school? And I was like, it's interesting that you say that, because I'm about to give a message about this idea of wanting versus willing. Wanting is a heart desire. Willing is really, putting myself in the position to do what it is that's being asked of me. And so it's just interesting that you use that phrasing. And she goes, again, do you want to go wake up Sam? And I was like, no, I don't want to go wake up Sam. Because remember, there's a difference between wanting and willing. And she was like, okay, are you willing to go wake up Sam? And I was like, no, I don't. No, I don't. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for thinking of me. Next time, maybe I'll be in a position to do that, but no. To which she said that there was a lot of things she didn't want to do to me, but a lot of things she'd be willing to do to me if I didn't go up and wake him up. So I went up and I woke up Sam. So there's a difference between wanting and willing. When it says that they gave wholeheartedly, that came from the right heart. When it says that they gave willingly, that came from them putting themselves in the position to actually do what it was that they wanted to do. And so we need to come with our generosity of being able to be wholehearted in our giving, but also be willing to give, put ourselves in the right position. And then it says that they gave freely. That when they gave, there were no strings attached to the gift. They weren't giving, it's not like they were opening up some temple municipal bond and like, hey, if I give so much, if I loan so much out, I'll get a 5 to 6% rate of return on that money, and that'll make it worth it. No, instead, they came and they were offering up the gifts freely. And that's because they came at it with the right mindset. And we talked about this back in week 1, but it's important for us to emphasize this again here is when we give freely, it's because we understand that the gifts that we're giving are not ours to give from just us, but they were given to us first by God, and so we are really giving back to him something that he already owns. Everything that is within this world is God's. David would go on to say in 1 Chronicles 29, 14, and 16, he says, but who am I and what is my people that we should be able thus to offer willingly? He says, for all things come from you and are of your own have we given you. He says, O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own. I know, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasures in uprightness. In the uprightness of my heart, I have freely offered all these things. And now I have seen your people who are present here offering freely and joyously to you. David understands that the only reason that he has the ability to give is because God has blessed him with what he has. And so for him to give it freely back to God is because he knows there's no strings attached to this, because this was yours always to begin with. Back in Exodus, when Moses is building the tabernacle and God is asking for people whose heart are moved to give, the resources in which they have to give, the gold that they bring to build the tabernacle, the materials that they bring to build the tabernacle, you actually find that all of that came from Egypt. Back in Exodus 12:36, as God is rescuing the Israelites from Egypt, it says this, it says, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have whatever they asked, and thus they plundered the Egyptians. As God rescued them from Egypt, they took anything that they could get their hands on. And here later, God is asking them to give resources to build the tabernacle, and it's all from the things that God allowed them to take back in Egypt. And so for us, we can come to that point of being able to give freely when we really understand that the things that we have, the things that we own, really aren't ours, but really are God's. And that all comes again from that idea of consecrating, when we're focusing on the spiritual and not on the physical. And so they had the right mindset. So they gave wholeheartedly, they had the right heart, they gave willingly, they gave from the right position, they gave freely with the right mindset. And then it says that they gave cheerfully. That the people rejoiced and that David rejoiced, that they had a party because of what they were able to do collectively together. That they cheered and they rejoiced. And sometimes, and maybe this is you here today, I know it can be sometimes me, is I don't have a problem coming and singing songs and worship collectively as a body, and the smile that it comes across my face and the excitement that I get. And then when the bucket comes by to give, it's like, that's a little bit harder. But here it says that they gave cheerfully. I do believe it's because they had made this decision. I'm going to focus on God. They came wholeheartedly. I'm going to give from deep within me. I'm going to put myself in a position to actually do this. I'm going to understand that this was all God's to begin with. And when they come to that, then it says that they rejoiced and that they gave cheerfully. Paul, when he said in 2 Corinthians, he says everybody must decide in their heart how much they're going to give, and not out of reluctancy or out of some type of coercion, but he says that God loves a person who gives cheerfully. Because when you're doing it for the right reasons, when you're not giving out of reluctancy, when you're not giving out of coercion, when it really is coming from you and that relationship that you have with God, that's where you can really experience cheerful giving. When really our generosity is no longer something that we do, but it is part of the worship that we give God. In Exodus, when Moses was taking up the collections for the tabernacle, the people got so excited about what it was that they were doing that they just kept giving and they kept giving and they kept giving and they kept giving until the workmen came to Moses and said, hey, we're done. The projects are all taken care of. We have nothing left to build. We have nothing left to fashion. Like, you can tell everybody to stop. And so Moses goes back to the people and he says, hey, listen, thank you for what it is that you're doing, but I need you to stop because we really can't do anything more with the gifts that are being given. To which I say this morning, challenge accepted. So we encourage you to really blow it out this year with the legacy gift. A few years ago, we did have this where you guys had given so much during the legacy gift that we had met all of the needs that we knew about. Everything that we had set out to do through the legacy gift, done. but we still had more gifts coming in every week leading up to Christmas. And so we had to start looking at other ministries to support. That's how we got involved with Children's Cup, was, hey, let's find another ministry to support. Let's find another person in need to give to. Like, we want to see those things happen. And so we encourage you to come and to give cheerfully. So the two things that I have for you this morning is, just like what we saw in Exodus, or just like we saw with Joshua, where the people kind of planned and prepared and waited to enter in, I want you to spend the next few weeks between now and December 10th really praying about how God would have you engage the legacy gift. What is the amount that you're going to decide in your heart to give? But spend some time. Don't take that lightly. Really spend some time in prayer individually. Spend time in prayer as a couple. Spend time in prayer as a family as to what God might be leading you to do and how he wants you to engage the legacy gift. And then what I want you to do is make a decision. Decide how much you're going to do. Like, put it down. This is what we're going to do as a family. And when you come on December 10th, give cheerfully. When you've made that decision, when you come with it wholeheartedly, when you come at it willingly, when you come at it freely, that should open up the doors for you to really give cheerfully and rejoice on that day of what you were able to help do, what God had blessed you with in order to be able to create this legacy gift. And we're going to come together as a family and do that and rejoice in that. The band's going to come forward now. We always go into, after the message, a time of response worship. This is where we want you guys to be able to really begin to apply the message, what God may be speaking to your heart about. We're also going to have the ushers come forward, and they're going to be handing out communion for you to partake in as well. And so I want us just to spend some time taking communion together. But as we go into the responsive worship, there's a couple of things to know. One, maybe there's something on your heart that's keeping you from really experiencing and demonstrating generosity. And so what you can do during this time is you can write that on a card and you can nail that to the cross throughout the auditorium here. That's just you signifying that, hey, I'm giving over to God what it is that is holding me back, what it is that's keeping me from really experiencing generosity. We're also going to have prayer partners up here in the front that would love to pray for you about what it is that you may be going through. But right now is the communion. Do we have the ushers available to pass this out? So they're going to come forward. We're going to take this collectively as a group. Did you? Oh, you did. In first service, they didn't open up my communion cup, and you should have seen me like struggling to try and figure out how to do this. It was like, if you want a good laugh, go back and watch first service, because I forgot to tell them to do that, and that was rough. But it was funny. Pastor Jerry called me a few weeks ago as I was getting ready for the message, and he said, hey, one of the things that we do normally this particular week of the month is we do communion. And he said, would you like to go ahead and do communion with the body? And at the time I was sick, and I was kind of really thinking about where I was in that moment. My headspace wasn't clear, and I said, you know what, why don't you move it to the next week? That might just be a little bit easier. And he said, okay, let's do it. And then I started putting my message together, and it was like God was like, really? Like, you want to punt it to next week? Like, really? Are you sure about that? And as I went through the message and I kept thinking about these points and thinking about what it was that Christ did for us, it's no different. That when we look at the sacrifice that Christ made for us, it started with him wholeheartedly. That Jesus gave to us willingly. In the Bible, it says that nobody takes my life from me. Jesus is saying, nobody is taking my life. I freely lay it down. So he was willing to give. He was giving willingly. And then it says that he gave freely. In Romans, it says that while we were still yet sinners, Christ died for us. That there wasn't something that we had to do first in order to get right, in order to have Christ make this sacrifice, that he did it first and then we respond to that. So he gave it freely. There's no conditions to it. And then it says that he gave cheerfully. In Hebrews, the writer says that for the joy set before the Lord, that he endured the cross. And so Christ gave wholeheartedly, he gave willingly, he gave freely, and he gave cheerfully. And so whenever we take communion, it is the reminder to us of what Christ did for us on that day. That Christ went to the cross for your sins and for my sins, that he took on that penalty for us so that we wouldn't have to endure it ourselves. And that his blood was spilled for us so that we can receive not only the pardon of sin, but also the forgiveness from our sins. David wants to build a temple for God to come and dwell among his people. And there at the temple, one of the things that they would do is they would do sacrifices. People would bring their sacrifices. But Christ, when we take this, when we remember this, we're remembering the ultimate sacrifice, that we don't have to keep doing that Christ died for us once, and that was enough. That's why we sing this morning, you've won, you've already won. And so on the night that Jesus was to be betrayed, he took the bread and he broke it, and he says, this is my body, which has been broken for you. As often as you do this, remember me. God, we thank you for the sacrifice that Christ made on our behalf. God, we thank you that he went to the cross for us so that we would not have to endure that. God, that he was willing to go to the cross, that he was willing to experience that pain and that suffering. And so as we take the bread this morning, we remember that body that was broken for us. In the same way, he took the cup and he poured it out, and he said, this is now a new covenant which has been poured out for you, that through the shedding of his blood, that we can receive the forgiveness of sins. And so as we do this, we remember him. God, again, we thank you for not just the fact that Christ died on the cross, but that he shed his blood for us so that we could experience the forgiveness of sins, which allows us to enter into that relationship with you, so that you no longer see us as sinners, but that you see us Christ-like. And so, God, we thank you for the ways in which Christ has first demonstrated generosity to us by going to the cross. And it's that, through the real understanding of that, through the real taking hold of that in our lives, we can demonstrate generosities to others. And so just as Christ did, so will I.